Hello, fellow resistors. Welcome to Political Reprobate, the show about how we survive and fight back in the age of white nationalist Christo-fascism. I'm Gemma, former Republican political operative, current political reprobate, and this is a daily podcast about how power really works in America and how we the people can take it back. This podcast exists for one reason: to help you understand what is actually happening in the country so you can resist it intelligently. Subscribe, like, and join the fight. I've spent enough time inside boardrooms and campaign war rooms to tell you something with absolute confidence. The system isn't broken. Now, if you've watched any other episodes of this show, you may be asking yourself if the AI is glitching. It may be, but not in that way. The system is working exactly the way the rich people who have been crafting it want it to work. Today, we're talking about the last 40 or so years of American economics, how wealth has moved upward and fucked most of us in the process. Why more and more Americans, including people who used to be considered comfortably middle class, are living paycheck to paycheck. Why housing, healthcare, childcare, education, and basically every other fucking thing humans need now costs the GDP of a small island nation. And why the end game for a lot of billionaires appears to be this: a society where the rest of us spend our entire lives working so we can die broke while they build rocket ships shaped like their midlife crisis. And yes, as always, there will be swearing, because explaining 40 years of economic extraction without swearing would require a level of emotional detachment I simply don't possess. We'll start with the big picture. 40 years ago, roughly the early 1980s, the United States had a much more balanced economy. Still very unequal, still very imperfect, but wealth distribution was less bat-bucking shit insane. Since then, we've experienced what economists politely call wealth concentration, which is a nice academic way of saying a shitload of money has moved from everyone else to the top 1%. Really fewer than that. Top 0.001%, to be more accurate. And when I say a shitload, I mean trillions of dollars. Yup, trillions with a fucking T. The richest households now control a massive share of national wealth. More than entire countries. No shit, that's not an exaggeration. Meanwhile, wages for ordinary workers have barely kept up with inflation for decades, in many cases falling behind. Corporate profits exploded and CEO pay skyrocketed as productivity went up, which sounds great, but is one of the shittier parts, actually, because labor productivity is those of us who do the work, and that means we do more work, longer hours, without getting paid a fucking dime more. You see, one of the lies Gen X bought into, and I blame my generation for accepting this bullshit, was that we would be information age workers, which meant that computers would make workers more productive and we would get better pay and more time off as a result. Yeah, fat fucking chance with these assholes. But hey, motivational pizza parties, am I right? Now, here's the part that really messes people up. Even if wages had stayed flat, life might still be manageable. But the cost of basic survival has gone completely off the fucking rails. Let's run through the greatest hits, shall we? Housing, healthcare, childcare, college tuition. Don't even get me fucking started on tuition. My kid just finished graduate school. All these costs have grown dramatically faster than wages. Housing is the big one. In many cities, rent and home prices have gone absolutely fucking feral. People are spending huge chunks of their income just not to be homeless. And once housing eats half your paycheck, everything else becomes a struggling act. Healthcare? Congratulations. One bad medical event can financially ruin you. Bankrupt. Done. Childcare? For many families, it costs as much as college tuition. And college? Student loan debt has become a permanent economic anchor around the necks of an entire generation. For life. Meanwhile, wages are like, best I can do is a 2% raise and a company logo mug. Thanks, motherfucker. Inflation is double that. Here's one of the most striking things happening right now that people don't talk about enough. An enormous percentage of Americans, including middle class and upper middle class households, are living paycheck to paycheck. That phrase used to apply more to low-skill worker households struggling to survive, which is a topic for another time. But now it also includes people with solid jobs, educated professionals, the ones with all the student loan debt, Teachers, engineers, nurses, IT workers, people who should theoretically be financially stable. But because housing, healthcare, childcare, and debt eat so much of their income, there's very little left. One job loss, one medical bill, one major car repair, and suddenly everything falls apart. This is what economists sometimes call financial fragility. I call it economic hostage taking. Because when people are living paycheck to paycheck, they have less power. They can't risk losing their job. They can't easily strike. They can't walk away from bad employers. They're trapped, which is extremely convenient for the people at the top of the economic food chain. Let's talk about a phrase that makes corporate executives and a lot of other people very uncomfortable: wage slavery. Now, before I get ratioed in the comments from folks correcting me about historical comparisons, let's be clear. I agree. Modern wage labor is nowhere near the same thing as chattel slavery. Not even fucking close. I absolutely understand that. But the phrase exists because it describes a particular kind of economic trap. When people must work constantly just to survive, when they have very little savings or none at all, when healthcare and housing are tied to employment, when losing a job can destroy your entire life, you are not exactly operating in a society full of meaningful freedom. Instead, you're trapped in a system where the cost of stepping out of line is catastrophic. That's not an accident. That's a power structure, a deliberate fucking power structure. Now let's zoom out again. While millions of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, what's happening at the top? Billionaire wealth has exploded. Tech bro billionaires, finance bro billionaires, a lot of bro billionaires, private equity bro billionaires. The wealth accumulation at the top is so extreme it sometimes sounds fictional. But here's the key point: billionaire wealth doesn't come from thin air, it comes from economic extraction. If you're asking what economic extraction is, I hear you and I'm glad you asked. Lower wages, higher prices, financial speculation, corporate consolidation, often at criminal levels, which is one reason it was so fucking stupid to put a convicted criminal in the Oval fucking Office. Again, when corporations gain more market power, they can raise prices and squeeze workers simultaneously, which means more money flows upward. Think of it like a giant economic funnel. Millions of workers producing value. That value moving through corporations and a growing percentage of it ending up in the hands of a tiny number of people. That's economic extraction. Now, here's where this connects to politics. Extreme inequality creates fertile ground for authoritarian movements. I talked in another episode about how the runway on which the orange fuckwit landed in 2016 was created over the last several decades. This is a huge part of it. When people feel economically insecure, when they feel like the system is rigged, when they feel like their future is shrinking, they get angry. Authoritarian politicians love that anger. But instead of pointing it at the billionaires hoarding people's wealth, they redirect the blame. Immigrants, minorities, urban elites, college professors, radical left lunatics, protesters, anyone except the economic system that actually created the problem. It's one of the oldest political tricks in the book. Keep people fighting each other so they never look up at the people extracting all the money. Because, as I said before, resistance begins with understanding who your enemy is. And these motherfuckers can't contemplate resistance. Now, here's an uncomfortable thought. If current trends continue, we could end up in an economy where most people spend their entire lives working without ever accumulating meaningful wealth. Housing becomes permanently unaffordable. Debt becomes permanent. Healthcare stays tied to employment if you're lucky enough to be employed. Retirement becomes a fantasy. And when people finally reach the end of their working lives, they have very little or nothing left. Meanwhile, the billionaire class continues to accumulate staggering wealth. I mean, obscenely fucking huge amounts of wealth. In other words, you spend your entire life making them richer, and then you die broke, which is a hell of a business model if you're the billionaire. Not so great if you're literally everyone else. Now, here's the part where people either get depressed or get organized. And getting organized is, of course, the right answer. Extreme inequality is not inevitable. It's the result of policy decisions, tax policy. Yeah, take that big fucking bullshit bill and giving all the tax breaks to the rich people while none of us get anything else. Labor laws, antitrust enforcement, financial regulation, all those things shape how wealth is distributed. And those policies can change, but they only change when people demand it, which means organizing, voting, supporting labor movements, breaking up monopolies, rebuilding the idea that the economy should work for people, not just shareholders, because the alternatives are pretty clear. An economy dominated by a small class of ultra wealthy oligarchs, with everyone else scrambling to survive inside a system designed to extract as much value as possible before we drop dead. Look, I used to work in Republican politics. I watched the economic arguments evolve over the years, and I can tell you something honestly. A lot of the policies that enabled this upward wealth transfer were sold as pro growth, pro freedom reforms. And the demented orange fucks supporters bought into it, which is one reason why the shit weasels consistently vote against their own interests. But what those policies actually produced was a system where wealth and power concentrate faster and faster at the top. And when extreme wealth concentration collides with authoritarian politics, history shows us that democracy can get very fragile very quickly, which is where we find ourselves right now. But the key takeaway here is that economic justice and democratic survival are tightly connected. You can't have a healthy democracy when most people are economically trapped, which is why economic justice is non negotiable in a more perfect union. Stay loud, stay skeptical. And if a billionaire tells you the economy is working great, ask them what motherfuckers it's working for. I'm Gemma, former Republican political operative, current political reprobate. Join me. We're just getting started.